Hello, we are live, and Eli Harman is here again. The primordial thinker, Eli Harman.
Hello, glad to be back.
Yes, thank you for coming back. Thank you for coming back because we have more to say about all this nonsense, obviously, and it's happening and unfolding as we speak, and we can actually barely keep up with it. In fact, the topic that I wanted to discuss has already sort of paled or been morphed by other events, and it seems day to day there's an ongoing unfolding of a legacy occurring that we must try to keep up with and comment on, I suppose, and speculate. Mostly I want to pick your brain about you. I think you have very good ideas in terms of speculation and what may happen or this and that. So that's why we wanted to talk to Eli again. And I should say apologies for being not my usual getup, but the wife is out for fucking wine o'clock with the ladies, so I had to be in the kitchen in case some kids are crying or something. And in fact, I may have to get up and deal with that at some point.
No worries, no worries.
So I'm in civilian gear. But yeah, where can we start with this? What was the topic I put on the video again?
So you wanted to talk about Elon Musk and Twitter and everything that's going on there?
Yeah, I mean that was even before we set that up. That was before Kanye and what's his name? What's the big fat guy? Fucking the show he appeared on. The guy, my
Alex Jones.
Alex Jones. Yeah. So, what are your thoughts about since we last spoke? Let's say, what would you say about the situation there?
About all that?
About the so when we last spoke, he bought Twitter, but it wasn't. I don't think he. Am I wrong on the timeline of what has happened? He definitely has escalated his things he's been doing. What do you think anyway? Since last time, that's all I can say.
Well, obviously Musk has a lot of haters on both sides. I've just been scrolling Twitter today, and everybody on the left is going bonkers, like calling him a Nazi, saying he's in bed with Nazis, or saying he's alt-right, or all this kind of stuff. All the usual hysterical leftist crap that they always throw at anybody who's not exactly towing their line.
Right.
And then of course the guys on our side are like, the dude's a shill, he's controlled opposition, he's a psyop, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Because I mean, there's two things going on there. There's the conspiracy theorizing, which I think most of the conspiracy theorizing is honestly it's a cope for mental or emotional instability for the most part.
Right.
And
on both sides, you mean on left and right?
Left and right.
Right. Yeah.
And I know I'm going to get a lot of pushback for that because a significant minority, a very visible, prominent minority of things that actually do happen kind of seem like, something out of the fevered imagination of a paranoid schizophrenic. So that is stuff that actually happens in reality. Yeah. However, most of the stuff that comes out of the fevered imagination of a paranoid schizophrenic does not happen in reality.
Right.
So it's still a terrible approach to epistemology, conspiracy theorizing.
Right.
Because if that kind of free association, and the meme that everybody always posts is that kid from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, with his bulletin board and the yarn, like tying things together, right?
Right.
Humans have very well developed pattern recognition systems. And if you let that kind of free association run wild, you can always find connections between things. You can always find evidence for even the most wild and ludicrous hypotheses.
Right.
So if you wanted to hypothesize, say, that Elon Musk is, or let's back out. Let's hypothesize that the world is controlled by some kind of covert cabal of Moloch worshipping, child sacrificing weirdos.
Which, it's sometimes there's hints that Balenciaga was recent. There are there's hints in that direction. But go on, sorry.
If that were the case, there's evidence you could point to, which is consistent with the hypothesis that Elon Musk has been paying his dues to that Dark Lord and his adherents all along. If you wanted to hypothesize that Elon Musk was controlled opposition or containment or a psyop or something like that, there's evidence you could point to that's consistent with that hypothesis. The trouble is, this doesn't actually mean anything, because due to the problem of induction, no matter how much supporting evidence you gather for a thesis, it means nothing. The only way we progress towards the truth is by falsifying or ruling out explanations. There can be many explanations simultaneously which are consistent with the evidence that's available. Right. And what we need to be doing is trying to figure out which ones we can rule out, or trying to find more information to rule some of them out. So one explanation that has been ruled out, I think this week, is that Elon Musk is not quite as absolutist on free speech as he may be trying to portray himself as. Right. I think we can rule that out, because he's already gone ahead and banned Kanye from his platform for posting the logo of a fringe religious cult that happens to bear some similarity to the logo of another religious cult that's less fringe and a political ideology.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he called it incitement to violence, which is preposterous, because legally speaking, incitement to violence is incitement to violence. You have to explicitly, literally call for violence, which just posting an edgy logo, I don't think meets that.
But, that's true. But okay. I do have things to say about everything you're saying as usual, but go on.
So, and it's disappointing to see Elon trot out this incitement to violence bullcrap, because this is a line that Twitter has been using for a long time. Like, this is what they said about Jordan Peterson when they banned him. And all he said was that the doctor who cut off Ellen Page's boobs was criminal. Now, is that incitement to violence? Maybe in a very roundabout, indirect way, because what we tend to do to criminals is often violent or something like that. But it's not, it definitely doesn't meet the legal definition of incitement to violence, because there's no explicit call to violence there. Anyway, they've been using this line for a long time, and it's disappointing to see Elon continue using it for what seems to be a politically motivated censorship move. But that being said, we've ruled out the possibility that he's a genuine absolutist on free speech. So that pushes him maybe more towards the, child sacrificing Moloch worshiper end of the spectrum, but it doesn't necessarily push him all the way over to that extreme either. We just know he's not on the other extreme. So he could be somewhere, could still be somewhere in between.
Where is he? Yeah. Right. Okay. So is that the full point, or is there more?
I mean, he has done some good stuff. It seems like he's shut down some Antifa accounts and some child pornographer accounts. So he's also being not an absolutist on free speech in a good way, because he's suppressing the free speech of some very undesirable and actually criminal elements that were not suppressed before.
That's true. Yes. So, in terms of what I would think of this, anyways, of those events as they unfolded, my view hasn't really changed much since last time, and I keep finding myself in the position of defending him, so much so that I think I'm getting a reputation, people are attacking me. Oh, you're sucking his dick or whatever, and harassing me about it. But I'm generally I don't expect from him to be anything other than what he is, let's say. So I was a fan of his already I remain to this day majorly a fan of his work with the space stuff and the rockets. And even all this makes me nervous that it's going to interfere with that. even though how great it is to have a free Twitter and have my account grow again, I worry that it's going to end in him being destroyed and that whole getting us to Mars business nixed. And I don't like anything. So that's how much of a fan I am of that part of what he does. So I studied him. I watched documentaries and I read about him, and I trust my own instincts about people and what I think of them, I guess. But the idea that he's in the Moloch area and part of that scene seems to me ridiculous. I can see, like, there's pictures of him, I think, standing beside either Epstein or that woman, maybe, I think, things like this. But of course, that's not a smoking gun of any kind. And you can, I believe his character is, as it seems, kind of goofy and politically naive in some ways. This is, again, the argument I was having with myself. Is he that naive or is he pretending? And even still, it's hard to tell. When he does things like he shared a meme of Pepe the Frog, or was it one of those kind of things? And that's pretty, if that's either incredible, that is either naive on his part, or he's sort of giving a message, or he doesn't give a shit. Because there is an association there. He did make a few fairly hardcore statements, tweets, comments that you may not expect, that you think, oh, that's getting a bit edgy, and but nothing's been out of line in his behavior that would make me think any differently. I think he is a bit goofy with it, and it is dangerous in a way. I think he's shooting from the hip, and he's kind of an emotional guy. And what happened with Kanye was like, because at first he was like being quite supportive and saying, "Oh, I forget you're talking about Jesus or something, and you can be forgiven." And I thought, okay, he's going to let him stay, which I thought was amazing at the time. I thought, wow, he's going to get a pretty severe backlash over this, I like Hitler stuff. So I was surprised at first that he wasn't just immediately banned or something. And yeah, I see that as like him having to play a game. He's going to, and it's probably the smart thing to do, I think. Even like, once again, I'm defending him and people are going to be angry with him. I do think overall, maybe that's not the best thing. Maybe it is or isn't. I don't know. But I'm sure he's got to have a little dance with these people, with the ADL and everybody else, to make the appearance of trying to be a centrist in some ways or something. And so he'd have to make some appeasement. And that was maybe a good way to do it, since Kanye is just going to say crazy shit anyways, which is enjoyable. But I mean, I don't think Kanye is a genius or anything. So I forgive him I can forgive that. Once more, I'm the forgiving attitude towards him.
I have a hard time believing that Elon Musk or whoever's backing him in this Twitter acquisition bid, I have a hard time believing they spent $44 billion in order to change nothing.
Right.
So they're obviously trying to take things in a different direction.
Yeah.
And the people who are upset about it not being different enough, for the most part, I think are guilty of unrealistic expectations, because they want it to be our platform, essentially. And Musk has never struck me as anything but, like you say, politically naive and more or less a classical liberal of sorts. Yeah. He believes in individualism and, natural rights, or I don't know if he would say natural, but rights of some kind, some conception of rights, individual rights.
Yeah.
And,
libertarian
and more or less individualistic and meritocratic in his outlook. So he's not, at least publicly, ethnocentric. He's not really nationalist, although he doesn't signal globalism very hard. And he admits that things like open borders and stuff can be problematic. But he's not, despite that, he's not by any means a nationalist in any discernible way. He's an immigrant. He has signaled support for immigration before. I think he would obviously recognize that there have to be some limits, right? It can't just be a free for all. But broadly speaking, he's never struck me as anything other than a classical liberal. So if what we're seeing is a realignment of elitard consensus, or not even necessarily a realignment, just a fissure appearing in elitard consensus, which until now has been uniformly globalist and multiculturalist and leftist.
Yeah.
And then now you have a few figures like Elon Musk who are kind of hearkening back to a more classical liberal sensibility. That is the beginning of an evolution that I see going kind of back to that a little bit among the elitard ranks. It's not a big pivot yet. It's only a few figures, although Musk is a very prominent figure. He's at least nominally the richest man in the world, although even he says there are other men who are richer. But
does he? Who like sort of Rothschilds or something, is it? Or
well, he hasn't mentioned them. He's specifically mentioned Putin and the Saudis.
Really? Putin,
but
maybe Saudi?
Yeah, I mean, as far as I know, he hasn't mentioned the Rothschilds or the Rockefellers or any of those.
Right.
Anyway, but so I mean, there are a lot of people who predict that this kind of pivot or this kind of evolution in elitard consensus, and I never call them elites because to me that has positive connotations. So I just call them elitards.
Yeah, exactly. That's the other thing I like about you is the open love of hierarchy to the point of like, classical theocratic, aristocratic thinking, which is
I want to be an elitist. I want to be a supporter of hierarchy. It's just that the elitards that we have right now are so just awful, and the hierarchies and institutions we have right now are just so infected with their bullcrap that makes me a de facto populist, even though fundamentally I loathe populism, right? Because I don't have a very high opinion of the common man. I have an even lower opinion. I have an even lower opinion of these fucking elitards because they've sunk way below the level of the common man in a lot of ways.
They are. Well, yeah, because they're essentially common idiots. I mean, to even really get into the rank of Trump and Bezos, etc. I mean, these are really mediocre thinkers, I think, because to get rich in the more modern era, in the era that they have, is to really be an exploiter of marketing and schemes that work on a mass scale to a mass populace, and to manipulate that or exploit that, you really have to be of the mind of that average idiot. I think you have to know what and have a good guess of what they're going to like and think, which means you're kind of their ilk. And I think this is the rise of the mediocre billionaire in many respects. Which, once again, I would say that Musk is at least a genuinely genius in terms of his engineering and some of his other stuff. Like I should talk about some of his faults so I don't sound like I'm a shill for him or whatever. But
he does break the elitard mold in a lot of ways, and he countersignals the elitard consensus. He's been talking about demographic collapse and how people need to have more children.
Yeah. The thing he said, the tweet he made that really summarized his opinion, what he's thinking, what he's worried about to me, was he said, how did he put it? Woke thinking or whatever, or wokeness is going to destroy civilization. This was his concern. He summarized it as that. That was his main concern. And he's absolutely right, obviously. And for a guy like him who sees things on a grand scale like that, that's going to really explain his actions, I think.
That's uncommonly perceptive for an elitard. Your average elitard just sees woke as a convenient tool that they can use to deflect criticism from themselves and onto people like us. They can be like, go after these like little white guys over here. They're totally privileged. And meanwhile, all the real privilege is in their hands and they're getting off scot-free, right? They're laughing in the, cackling over somewhere behind the scenes, watching, the dependent underclasses come after us. And, all the attention is off of them. So I think that's kind of how they see woke. I'm sure they don't buy into it to any great extent, but they obviously pump it. They obviously support it. They obviously propagate it.
Yeah.
I read an article recently about some elitard who went to college, some elitard scion, right? Some pampered rich girl goes to college, gets infected with the woke. Her elitard parents hire a cult deprogrammer to snap her out of it.
It wasn't like 300 pounds 300 pounds a day, even or something. It was a rich family. They
Something
paid a
like
lot of
that.
money.
Yeah.
For
So it's like cult deprogramming for me, but woke for thee.
Yeah, I often worry about this with my kids. I'd be like, oh, like I've tried to warn them, and I believe it's working. Just being honest and saying, look, can you see how stupid this is? And they're like, yeah. So far so good, but yeah, I hope I don't have to go down that route. I saw someone say also that it was beginning to happen with their daughter or something. I don't know what age she was, and they just basically took her completely off the internet, and also I think maybe all social interaction. I'm not sure, for 6 months, and that did the trick apparently. As you wouldn't be surprised.
That's almost what you got to do, probably. Send them to live with the Amish or something.
Yeah, or just like become more Amish yourself, I guess, or and get them away from whatever. It'd be some social group, some person, especially with girls. I think it's usually they're very influenced. There'll be one girl that influences the other ones for whatever reason, and they'll adopt anyway to impress her and be like her and stuff like that. Or they'll also just absorb what they're told more thoroughly.
Well, the Amish have basically the right point of view, or the only viable point of view on the woman question, which is to unplug them from global hierarchies and networks and just make it so that the only ones that are relevant to them are the local hierarchies and networks. Right. And that's the only way you could, keep women somewhat sane with the amount of insanity that is out there currently.
You saw this written in the Amish mission statement of that, but this is your summary of their behavior, your observation, I guess. Is it? But
right.
I can see what we're doing here. Yeah, I mean, that is what you have to do. I mean, it's a real problem. That issue. That's one. It's. We shouldn't get too much into that, probably. But yeah, another thing they really, I get a lot of whenever someone criticizes me for, I feel I should. As I said, I was a fan of what he was doing before. I'm worried about this Twitter thing, but I do feel like supporting Musk. Generally, I do. And if he does something, even say with Kanye, when he was maybe not being as pro right-wing free speech as he could, I can see why he has to do it. Maybe strategically it's a good thing to do. But the main reason I get attacked, or the main thing that people attack me over, is this business with the little chip in the brain he wants to do. His obviously. So I did want to talk about this. So to explain this a bit, and we can talk about that, because a lot of people really do not like the transhumanism, and I understand why they don't like it.
Well, with good reason.
With good reason, exactly. Yeah, I myself am not de facto opposed to it in my usual kind of fan of science fiction way. I think we talked about this last time, maybe, where I don't mind if they make a cyborg. If a guy wants to replace his arm with a gun, or some cool thing like an eye laser or something. I mean, why not? I'm all for that. So I'm not, opposed to it, sort of ethically, philosophically, or otherwise. But I can see why there's the trepidation over that belief, that thing he's doing. What's it called? Neuralink. And I haven't even looked into his overall plan with it, what it's all about. But that, again, I would say is part of his naive optimism. He's obviously a progress man. He's a technophile man of progress, right? So he's going to be interested in these things and believe in them to a certain degree. And I'm not at all surprised he would be a little bit transhumanist. Maybe I'm sure he's probably thought about the fact that someone might take it over and just transmit, probably ads into your brain or something. But the idea that he's personally doing it, this is the message I always get. He's doing it so he can control your mind personally himself. So I find that to be a stupid thing to say. That I would be greatly surprised if that was his plan. But yeah, what do you think of that?
Well, I don't think his intentions there are nefarious. I mean, I obviously get the trepidation, and I'm not going to be first in line to sign up for the implant. I probably will never get it. And I think a lot of this technology, people on both sides who are afraid of technological progress and who cheer it on and eagerly anticipate it, I think are both guilty of overestimating how much progress and how rapidly it'll occur in the near future. I think a lot of this stuff is a lot farther off than either the boosters or the fearmongers say it is.
Right.
Whether it's even self-driving cars, they've been saying those are right around the corner for the last decade, and they're apparently no closer to being, on the road in a big way. But I'm sure they'll get there eventually. But I just think that the introduction and the adoption of all of these technologies is going to be a lot slower than probably most people anticipate. So that's a good thing in the sense that it gives us time to figure out what some of the problems and consequences are and kind of sort them out or mitigate them, or, you know, maybe take more extreme measures. I don't discount the possibility that maybe something like a Butlerian jihad is in our future, or may need to be in our future, because things could definitely go too far in some direction or another. And we may have to be like, you know what, not only do we have to go back, but we have to bar that road forever.
What's the point of Neuralink? I don't even know exactly. Is it to like communicate instantly with somebody else who has it? Is it? I don't know.
The general point is to increase the bandwidth of human computer interfaces. So the bandwidth now is between, you know, like a keyboard and a mouse and a monitor, right? So there's a limited data rate that things can get between a computer to a human and back. So the general goal is to increase the bandwidth of that interface. The initial goal will be to help out people who, you know, are maybe unable to use traditional interfaces at all, who are, you know, disabled, severely disabled in some way or another, that sort of thing. So it has medical applications in that sense. But, you know, as far as like just getting the chip so you can nerd out a lot harder on whatever, whether it's a hobby like video gaming or, you know, work, some kind of computer related work, I don't think mass adoption of that is anywhere around the corner. You know, you saw it with Google Glass, right? They came out with the augment. Yeah. There have been several attempts at like the augmented reality stuff, and they don't gain mass adoption because they are so nerdy and they impair you in other ways, like socially, for example. Like, so the cost is too much. The social cost basically does not justify the whatever gains you're getting in productivity, hypothetically, or, you know, non-productivity, time-wasting games or pornography or whatever else you're using them for.
Right. Well, in terms of Musk and what he does, though, this is the thing about him, especially from like some of the like the documentary and some of the things I read about, and just the ways he went about what he did already. He's willing to take huge risks. Like when you did the SpaceX, the first rocket failed, and that was a huge deal. Like that was millions gone, right? He's trying to start a private rocket company and it like exploded or whatever. So like that's major problem. Second rocket failed. I think it made it possibly near orbit and blew up also. So then they were heading to the third one, and he pretty much put all his money on that, a huge gamble, and like gambled everything on that working, and it also failed. I think around that time, the car company Tesla was making money or something. He somehow got some more money, and he said, "Okay, boys, one last time," and then that also failed. But from each fail, they got a little bit farther. So he literally gambled all his businesses, everything he had, one more time. He somehow found more money or something, and then it worked. So he's willing to do that. This is what I wonder, is he doing that with Twitter as we speak as well? Is every tweet he makes a gamble? Is dancing with Kanye and dancing with you know, the ADL and everything else? It's like you know, he's a gambler. That you don't get rich like him without being a bit of a gambler, probably. So that's in his personality. And I forget what my point was with that and regarding Neuralink. It'll come back to me later. Go on.
People on our side were obviously dismayed and you know, acting like they felt greatly betrayed when he first took over Twitter, and it seemed like he was negotiating with the ADL.
Yeah.
And I was like, just give it a while. Let's see what happens. Right. And of course, immediately the ADL like stabs him in the back, and he, you know, made some words to that effect as well, you know, basically saying, you know, fuck these guys, in effect.
Yeah. Stop defaming me. I would like that one. That was a good little.
So, you know, and I think a lot of that is just part of how you play the game, right? You give them the opportunity to screw it up, and you let them screw it up, and then you do what you want.
Right. But like the thing, he takes enormous risks. He does, like even buying Twitter and this whole scheme or whatever he's doing. Like, you know, it's a risky sounding thing. I remember what I was my point I was getting to the Neuralink. But not only does he take these risks, so often it works out for him. And it seems like he does have some kind of savvy, business-wise or otherwise, an understanding of. I think, and otherwise it's just pure luck all the way through. I don't know. So that whatever he's doing with Neuralink, maybe he has some kind of insight or something as to how and why it would be actually a popular, worthwhile thing.
Or maybe Neuralink's going to fail, or maybe it's going to remain a tiny niche product forever that doesn't change the world. I mean, those could always happen.
Yeah, but whatever his plan is, you just never know at what level he's scheming. Like in one of those documentaries I was watching,
he wants to rickroll you psychically.
Permanently. I could live with that. I could live with that one. Better that than the fucking Facebook ads with like, the latest trendy whatever transgender person telling you something or whatever. When I go through Facebook is the most miserable abomination of a thing I've ever seen in my life. It's like going to hell to visit for like 1 minute. It's like slow and it's shit in the ads and like everything is crap. Yet I go there. I must go there. I'm forced to, it seems like, every now and again. Revisit that nightmare of a place. Gotta hate it. But imagine something like that being broadcast into your brain. Like, that would be hell. So that could be naivety on his part. He doesn't understand that. Maybe but how can he know at this point? But like, he doesn't understand that this Neuralink or something else could be adapted and changed and used by people to cause great suffering. Who knows? But
there's definitely a lot of perils. There's definitely a lot of pitfalls. I think the pace of technological change, though, is actually slowing down.
Change or advancement? Like advancement, you mean?
Both. Well, because not all change is advancement, so that's a valid point. But if you just look at Moore's law, for example,
right,
the time it's taking for the number of transistors on a chip to double is lengthening. Like it used to be every year, and then it was every 18 months, and now it's like every 2 years. So it is getting slower, and we've actually passed the point where, it used to be also every generation of chips was cheaper than the last, when it was top of the line. So not only were the chips getting faster and denser, but they were also getting cheaper. Well, that's no longer the case. So the chips have started getting, the higher end chips have started getting more and more expensive again. So we're going to reach the point, I think, before too long, where it is possible to continue pushing progress on those technologies and others, but it might not be economically viable in the sense that it might cost more to make certain advances than they would actually be worth on the market. Because, for example, a chip fab costs now something on the order of $10 billion to make a new foundry to build high-end computer chips.
Right.
So in order to be able to pay that capital back to earn a return on that investment, you have to be able to sell an absolutely massive number of these chips, or sell them for a very high price, or some combination thereof, right?
Yeah.
So what that has done, essentially, it has cut the number of competitors at the highest end of the chip market down and down and down and down, whereas there used to be dozens of competitors at the leading edge of computer technology. Now there are basically only a handful or less. And a significant majority.
I understand
a significant majority of all the highest end chips are actually made by one company in Taiwan. So a lot of the other high end.
The advance required here is that somehow the entire concept of the chip is superseded by some other bizarre something that comes out of left field and somehow does the same job. At some point,
well, there are going to be changes. Obviously, things are going to evolve. There are going to be different architectures and new ideas about how to approach architecture and all that kind of stuff. But I think the point is that the low hanging fruit, and this is true across a lot of domains, a lot of disciplines, not just chips. The low-hanging fruit has essentially already been picked. So it's getting harder and harder to make gains in any domain, in any discipline. It takes more and more work, more and more collaboration, more and more capital to make continued advances. And this is all happening at a time when we're undergoing significant dysgenia. When
Good word.
people
Good use of the word.
people worldwide
Yeah.
are losing IQ points. In the West, it's been going down for over 100 years.
Yeah.
About 1 point per decade.
Yeah.
So we've already lost a standard deviation of intelligence.
Yeah.
And, in terms of the number of geniuses per capita we have, we're below our historic highs. In terms of the number of patents per capita that are being granted, we're below our historic highs. In terms of the number of books per capita that are being published, we're below our historic highs. So we've seen intellectual decline.
Number of books. There's endless. There's reams and reams of chick lit, and like New York Times #1 bestsellers of just like, useless tripe.
Right.
If you go to, it seems like there's more books than ever. Like an actual amount of books of just like.
Probably in absolute terms, there's more than ever, but in per capita terms, it's lower than it. I mean, if you think about the entire corpus of like Icelandic literature that was produced 1,000 years ago or whatever, that was produced by a population of 50 to 70,000 people.
All right, amazing.
Which is per capita. That's phenomenal output.
If only you could have that with some of the technology we had now. Imagine if we had this kind of, But I guess one thing goes hand in hand with the other. Because there's no world where the intelligent genius creators aren't also benefactors and feel a need to help out as many people as they can, and so on and so forth.
Well, the problem is that when the average intelligence goes down, even if the absolute number of geniuses is going up because, bigger population or whatever, so there's a smaller fraction of the population, but because the population is so much bigger, there might actually be more geniuses in absolute terms than there were in the past. But the problem with that is when the average intelligence goes down, the geniuses don't get to focus on genius stuff anymore. They have to do stuff like supervising idiots. And so
be ruled by the idiots. That's what I found.
Or worse, ruled by the idiots. Right. Yeah. So, there's all sorts of reasons why I think the pace of technological progress is slowing down.
Oh yeah, and that's why it's even more amazing what's happened. And that's why I think he's one of the very few forces in the world that is sort of cutting against that at all. Like what he did with the relanding rockets business is amazing, and it's one of the few innovations I can think of since the internet that is just fairly amazing that he was able to do that at all. To come up with the idea and actually execute it is pretty amazing. Because I used to be a fan of the space elevator plan. You know that one? Yeah. I always thought that was a good idea. And this is the other thing I noticed about him. If you read about him or see his documentaries, he's sort of like you. He will assess immediately the pros and cons of something or other, and he'll lay it out for you. And he'll be like, nope, that's shit. It's stupid. It'll never work. I think he said, what did he say? He said it would be easier to make a highway that spanned all across the world, over the oceans from one country to another, than it would be to make a space elevator. Just because he has that engineering mind and he knows where you fall into the pitfalls of losses and extremes of things that the average person can't think of, where this and that becomes impossible, right? So he thought, okay, they can't do the space elevator, so we got to have a rocket that relands, and so he built one. But yeah, that assessment of things, he can immediately assess. This is one thing you can't deny him. You can say you don't trust him or that he's a chill or this and that, but you can't deny his ability and his I didn't want to say courage, but forthrightness of attitude regarding that he will absolutely make that decision and be like, nope, can't do that, do this. And he often seemed to be right. But it does remind me of you, with the assess things and nope, this is out, you must do this.
He does have a pretty good track record. I will say, definitely I support the rocketry stuff, the advances in rocketry, because that's something that I think is important, and I support, human colonization of the solar system and eventually other star systems as well. Right. For most things, I think it's a good thing that technological progress and change is slowing down, because, I think Ed Kaczynski actually got this right, which is that technological change is not neutral. It has consequences, specific consequences, systematic consequences that are unpredictable. We don't know what all the consequences are going to be before we do it. So we still haven't sorted out all the consequences, figured out all the consequences, and come up with solutions or mitigations for the technological progress we've done up till now, the last 200 years.
Yeah.
We still haven't figured a lot of this shit out, how to live with this stuff that we've created.
But alongside the
dysgenia
that's happened, as you also admit, I don't think we will now. We can't coherently examine and assess and even act on things like we once could, right? Like we don't seem to even be able to take a sane route out of anything anymore. So it seems to me, I feel whatever Musk is doing.
Well, there's always the evolutionary. We don't have to design a solution necessarily, but we do have to evolve a solution, and that's a subtractive process. So the groups who get it wrong will, fade out. Basically,
right. We don't even have a group anymore. We can't even you and I can talk about. All you and I can do is talk about this.
But my point is, whether we're trying to design a solution or evolve a solution, either way, it takes time.
Right. Okay.
And so if we're always changing things, we haven't even solved the last set of problems before we create a whole new set of problems.
Right.
Then it's hopeless. There's no way to untangle it all. There's no way.
That's why I would say it is hopeless. I would say at this stage, the level of chaos and the level of impossible, competing forces in every little institution of every kind and all the rest of it is more or less is impossible. All we can do at this point is someone like Musk or other sort of freebooting characters on their own, sort of sidestepping all of the dysgenia, as you put it, and the chaos, and maybe managing to do something on their own, so that I can foresee a future where maybe you could get a colony on Mars while here on Earth we've been reduced to barbarism or something,
Well, I don't think that's really sustainable, though, because the only conceivable way for space colonization to work, to get to the point where space colonies can support themselves, is it's probably going to take hundreds of years where they are fully a colony and not an independent branch of civilization in their own right.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
Meaning they're going to have some kind of functional purpose, whether it be resource extraction or research or something that's going to be sufficient to pay for their operations.
Right.
And they're going to have to trade with the parent civilization, Earth, for a lot of their necessities.
See, this is something you proprietarian guys are very good at, I must say, is always remembering the economic equation in things that way. But yes, but you're right. But when I said returning to barbarism, I did kind of mean the West, I suppose, and that I do think parts of the world will survive civilizationally, whatever that means. And in fact, we will have to come out of it in some kind of new fashion as well. And we will have lost a lot of ground, I think, and stuff like that. I just think these things are happening simultaneously. So when you were talking about problems and solving them, all I see is an increase in problems happening currently. And anything good that happens otherwise is like some guy on his own. Luckily, someone like Musk, who has a lot of personal power, can do things. What he's doing with Twitter is him kind of reaching out and trying to help things overall. How much of an impact do you think that can have? Just Twitter being a bit more free the way it is. Can it make a huge impact? What do you think?
On the larger society, I don't know. It may not be nearly enough. But for him, controlling his own platform, communications platform, social media, he wants to make it into like a more general media platform, it sounds like. So there's other streams of information being integrated, not just user-generated content. Right. Having his own media platform and communications platform, I think, is huge for him. So he's not subject to that threat of being locked out or shut out or canceled.
Right.
So I think it's huge for him, and there are very good reasons for him to go after doing that. I'm not sure how much effect it will have on the larger society. Probably some, probably not none. But we probably need a lot more than that. Now, as far as the free speech thing, this kind of evolution back towards something like free speech, I think, is positive because it's better than communist controlled speech, right? It's better than communist censored speech, communist compelled speech. It's not the final solution, obviously, because free speech is how we got into this mess. Free speech is what the communists used to agitate and to organize and to gain power. And they used various propagandistic and manipulative tactics to circumvent. The theory behind free speech originally, like if you read Thomas Jefferson or whatever, was in a marketplace of ideas, right? The good ideas are supposed to win out. The truth is supposed to win out. Well, we know that doesn't happen. We know there's all sorts of ways to make manipulative propaganda win out instead. And if you're not prohibiting those, if you're not regulating those, then that's what you're going to be taken over by. And that's what we have been taken over by. We've been taken over by simplistic, manipulative, emotional propaganda. And basically, democracy is an entire sham and an entire farce, because all an election decides anymore, it's totally decided by whoever can manipulate the narrative the best, right?
And even beyond that now, it seems more and more like genuinely, openly corrupt. Did you see it? Actually, he made a tweet, I think this morning I saw it, about the Brazil elections being Twitter manipulated. Did you see that?
I did not.
Yeah, there was Musk himself made a tweet saying the recent elections there, which are so highly contested to the point of the military possibly taking over, that there was a Twitter involvement there, that there was a request from the left in Brazil which was, acquiesced, and they performed whatever shadow banning, etc. they had to do to affect those elections. So he's got, for all their stupid talk about Russia interfering in elections and that, he's really got evidence of them doing it all the time. For as much as that even matters anymore, though, I don't think the left, either the elite left in charge or the leftist mob, generally care how corrupt they are. And I don't think even revealing this will have much effect beyond. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you have a different view, but
no, I don't think they care. I think conservatives may still care,
right? But so it depends. What, say in America, what would you guess is the dividing line, percentage wise, between people left and right? Do you have any idea?
I think it's about 1/3 left, and then 2/3, let's say right, or right plus center. There's different ways of dividing it, obviously, and it depends on how you're defining things. Okay. But in terms of left, it's a minority.
Are you sure though? Because I thought that too, up until the George Floyd riots, and then I thought, Jesus, there's. We weren't even in a culture war. I just thought so many of them seemed to be actually just waiting for a chance to signal, Antifa left. That made me think. That really made me wonder. I've always thought since it's more like a 50-50, maybe even more of them. But what makes you think
among whites, it's not 50-50. Among whites, only about 1/3 lean left.
Really? Are you sure?
Explicitly, yeah. I mean, obviously, the conservatives absorb a lot of leftism because anything that's been leftist for more than 10 years is the status quo. And so the status quo bias conservatives pick it all up, right?
Right.
Just with some time delay. So if you wanted to nitpick, you could lump them in as leftist too. Because they're only a decade, maybe 2 decades at the most behind the leading edge of leftism. But as far as the people who are ideologically and culturally left, like fully left, it's only about 1/3 of whites. Now, their coalition, when you bolster it with all the non-whites, who, by the way, are mostly not leftists. They align with the leftist coalition for, mainly self-interested reasons.
Yeah.
It's not ideological reasons.
So what about that midterm elections business? Was that just conservative white people not giving shit, not showing up, or was it just, what do you think? It was all fake, or?
Some combination of that. I don't know the exact proportions.
That didn't seem a great indication. The supposed red wave not happening. I thought that was another sign that.
I think one possibility is just that the Republicans are not very compelling to their base, the Republican establishment and the Republican politicians. They are out of touch with their base, and they can't motivate their base because they're still talking about bullshit like tax cuts and whatever. And it's like people are just like, there's more important shit going on. Like, why won't you address immigration? Why won't you address all this other stuff? And they don't want to address it because, you know, either that would require some semblance of moral courage and challenging the frame and the narratives of the dominant leftist ruling party, or, you know, it would be something that would be opposed by the Republican donor class, like on immigration. The donor class wants the immigration because they want the cheap labor, right? The Democrat Party obviously wants it because immigrants overwhelmingly vote Democrat. But the Republican donor class wants it too because they want the cheap labor. They're the employers. And there's an alignment of interest there. So the Republican base gets left out in the cold. And there's actually research on this. You know, basically what normal Americans want, what normal, everyday, ordinary Americans want from government, from policy, has zero impact on what policy actually gets passed. Zero.
Yeah.
Economic elites have a fair bit of sway, but the ordinary masses, the populist masses, so to speak, have zero impact on what gets passed in Congress or what regulations bureaucrats promulgate and enforce.
Right. It's like that woman. Where was she from? What European country was that female politician was? She was like, even my voters don't want war in Ukraine, but that, you know, I'll just have to make sure they don't have any say in that, and that they really are of the attitude that they are doing the best for everybody, regardless of what everybody says or thinks, and yet prattling about democracy the entire time while they're.
And this is why I'm a reluctant populist, because I would love to celebrate that fact and be like, well, you know, the average man is an idiot anyway, and he doesn't know what he wants or what's good for him. Yes. You know, I'm fine with that. But the problem is the people who are making the decisions are making even worse decisions. Yeah. And so that puts me in the populist camp, which is not where I want to be. So I'm pretty upset about that. But the fact remains that in this day and age, the average person does seem to have a lot more common sense than the average elitard.
Yes, well, you and I have read Ragnar Redbeard, I think, and so we both know what constitutes a proper and true elite. If they vanish from the world, you know, it's just a matter of time before they come back into it. Not to say that we are necessarily the hard men that will do it.
Well, we're living with the consequences of Nietzsche's inversion, right? Where he talks about the slave revolt in morality and all this kind of stuff, and the transvaluation of values and the old aristocratic ideas of, you know, nobility and aristocracy, which just means rule by the best, right? Yeah. I think aristos is like the best. So that whole value scale was inverted, and now we're being ruled by the worst. The most dishonest, the most.
Well, I'm not sure we're even there yet. According to Evola, there's a stage. There's the first you reach the stage where the absolute bottom is ruling over everything, and then beyond that, there's an even deeper darkness of the Kali Yuga, of a kind of spiritual evil for the last 1,000 years of total blackness. That's even worse than everything you can conceive of now. And I don't know, both those guys, Nietzsche, Spengler, and Evola, those guys are often, you know, their predictions seem quite accurate a lot of the time.
That sounds pretty bad, but unfortunately, I can't rule it out.
Yeah, no shit. I mean, because if you get so bad, look how bad things are going. We're still not at the point. I don't know we've reached the ultimate low yet. What would be the ultimate low? Being ruled over by the trans Down syndrome crew or something like that. I mean, could you reach that point? And then you're like literally go and you smash your head out. There was a writer who said that one day the man will smash out his head on a rock because he's superior to the rock. Like things are unequal, and he'll just like kill himself and smash himself and die. So though, like we're not at the lowest low yet. We have a lot of like, you know, young chicks.
The other I think a lot of this depends on whether you're an accelerationist or an incrementalist. You know, the accelerationist would think if it gets worse, that's better in some way because it'll wake up more people, it'll motivate more people to the correct course of action, whatever. I don't think that's likely to be true. I think if you make things worse, they just get worse. And no matter how bad they are, they could probably be even worse. So you're just on the slippery slope towards something even worse. If you think we're at rock bottom and we couldn't possibly go any lower, you're almost certainly wrong. We can go lower.
Well, usually, and also in every attitude and everything that happens, there's like a good and bad side, you know.
Right. I mean, I can see the positives if we were being ruled over by the downy trans community or whatever. I feel like their rules would be a little bit easier to circumvent, you know, because they might not have the ability or the coordination.
Okay, what would be the ultimate evil? So we've got like, you know, young girls, young, like, you know, pub girl, like what do you call them, club going girls as prime ministers and things now. So what could be the next step down from there of like just total irrational, you know,
literal children?
I guess children. Could they?
No,
I don't
drag kids.
They prefer to torture children. They prefer to like mess up children and torture them. It seems like. Then actually, like they can't seem to get away with putting them in trad kids. Yeah, I don't know. What could be? How could we get lower other than like literally, you know, mentally disabled people? Although we are getting to that stage, aren't we? There's a few of those, right? There's Biden and the guy that got elected at the midterms. He's got some kind of stroke thing. That big hulking ogre of a guy.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. I can't remember his name. Yeah, I mean that's where we're headed. But you know, I can see some advantages to going further and further down that road. When I look at like North Korea though, or some places, it's like that just shows how low you can go, and I don't want to get anywhere near that. So I'd rather
pursue. Well, North Korea is in some ways best Korea.
Well, yeah, you could make that argument, and you could also make the argument that, you know, they're different from us, so maybe they can go lower in some ways than we're even capable of. But
that's when you hit the reversal of the reversal. I think is like when Stalin, eventually, when you eventually get Stalin, and he's more or less not so different from the Tsar. In fact, he has more power than the Tsar as an individual. You know, when your reversal hits the counter reversal. So, you know. Only so if we're trapped in a spiral of the left where we just get worse and worse, then from the left eventually will come someone with such authoritarian personal power.
So I can see some benefits to acceleration. Like for example, the Biden administration. This was a point somebody made to me recently, and I kind of see the point. The Biden administration might be the first administration to actually act like it takes its diversity bullshit seriously. Like previous administrations, Democrat or whatever, they've always had the tokens on the cabinet or whatever, but they put them in inconsequential positions where they couldn't do any real damage, right? It's almost like as if they realized they weren't actually equal.
Obama would have put it a lot, I think. No? But anyways, he's sort of the same thing.
Not nearly as much as Biden has.
Yeah. Maybe.
So, and they're pushing this diversity stuff through all the institutions super, super hard, like way harder than they've ever done before. So it is eroding the ability of the institutions to function. And that's going to include institutions of enforcement, right? Because now they're pushing it into like the special forces, the special operations forces.
Yeah.
So it's like at this point, it's like, okay, whatever. We don't have to be afraid of you anymore, at least not as much as we were. So I can see some advantages. I can see some benefits. But on the other hand, I lean more towards the incrementalism point of view, which is if we can be moving in the right direction, and if somebody like Elon Musk can move us in the right direction, even if he's not perfect, even if he doesn't have the right goal, even if he doesn't have the right end state in mind, even if he doesn't want to go far enough, whatever the case may be, if he's moving us in the right direction, I'm going to see that as a good thing, and I'm going to try not to get in his way.
Explain incrementalism, and while you do that, I'll be right back. I'll be back in a moment. But like you talk, explain incrementalism. I can hear you from over here.
So incrementalism is basically the idea that we can make incremental progress towards, the ultimate objectives that we desire. And so that we can get there step by step, we can make little gains, little steps that move us in that right direction, and we can build upon those, one upon the other, and it can be a cumulative process that the more we gain, the more power we'll have and the more resources we have to make further gains, etc. So it's basically just kind of the opposite of accelerationism, where under accelerationism, things have to get worse so that you can wake up a critical mass of people to do something sufficiently extreme to make them better all at once. And so the opposite of that would be incrementalism, where no, you don't need that to happen all at once. You can make little gains here and there in different ways, and those can build on each other in a cumulative way to ultimately get where you want to go.
So it's sort of like a civilization breaking in two in a way, in that on one side, because you have to break away from the one to have any gains at all. No?
I mean, it is actually possible that the left could screw up badly enough to provoke a widespread backlash that totally overturns their whole project and them with it. That is something that is possible to happen, but it's basically entirely on them to screw up that badly.
So like a nuclear war kind of thing. How bad would it be?
Well, I mean, they could just push people far enough that they're not going to take it anymore.
Could they know? Because I could see people already being pushed like beyond the point I thought they would ever go.
Yeah.
I just feel like,
that's the danger of accelerationism. Like, you think that if things get worse, it'll wake people up and motivate them to go where you want them to go. But you don't necessarily know how much endurance they have for stupidity.
Well, like say my accelerationism is I'm willing. Inside myself, I have spiritually and otherwise accepted Evelyn's prediction of 1,000 years of darkness. And I'm just like, well, let's just get on with it then. Why dick around with all this insulting nonsense? Take me, into the heart of it, into the heart of Cali, and let's get on with it.
Well, I don't know that I've resigned myself to that fate yet, but
well, no, in the sense that if you believe in perennialism,
right,
then you believe things will cycle back, and however long it takes, hopefully it's not actually 1,000 years.
Well, this gets back to a point I was trying to make earlier, but I think we got sidetracked, which is I think Elon Musk is kind of the herald of a pivot back towards something different, something more classically liberal. Yeah. And another example of this I would cite is Jonathan Haidt. And he's the Righteous Mind guy, the Moral Foundations guy.
I know his name. What's Jonathan Haidt?
He's a Jewish moral psychologist who used to be a leftist, and now he calls himself a centrist because he did a lot of research on moral psychology, and he figured out that, there's actually a lot of conservatives, and they're not just ignorant and backwards and pathological like most on the left assume they are. Like, this is actually a coherent, more or less inborn sensibility orientation that is adaptive in a lot of ways. And he thought the left was being too dismissive of this. And so now he calls himself a centrist.
Okay.
And he wrote an article back in 2016 where he basically said, that he's a globalist, he's a multiculturalist, but that the elitards are pushing these agendas too fast and too hard, and they're triggering what he called authoritarian. So he divided conservatives into three groups: the laissez-faire conservatives, which would basically be liberals or classical liberals or libertarians. They basically are skeptical of government involvement in anything, whether it's social or economic or whatever. Laissez-faire conservatives, status quo conservatives who are skeptical of change to the status quo and resist it, and what he called authoritarians, who are people that aren't different from the other kinds of conservatives under normal circumstances, but when they perceive what he calls a normative threat, meaning, severe challenges to like their in-group or their identity or their interests or whatever, in morally significant ways, then they get activated. He said it's like they have a button on their forehead that
like Mean Machine from Judge Dredd, a little
yeah,
dial.
Like they turn into these raging authoritarians who desire to, purge sexual deviance and, get rid of alien out groups and, basically
what do you think of
the
this
Warhammer 40K stuff, purge the heretic and the,
right.
and the Xenos.
Right. Well, I know what I think of that, his theory. So what do you think of it? Because I have some comments on that theory of his.
I think it has some explanatory value, some explanatory power. Because I can compare that to my own experience, which is that I went through a prolonged libertarian phase where I was basically kind of like a laissez-faire conservative, right? But then when the woke started getting really pronounced and the immigration stuff started happening, and especially the migrant crisis over in Europe and all this kind of stuff, when it reached a certain threshold, it was almost like a switch flipped. And I was like, all right, this has gone too far. Like the laissez-faire stuff just isn't going to cut it. Like we have to do something serious to address these threats. And my priorities shifted. Right. So for me, it was kind of like a sudden switch like that. So I can imagine for a lot of other people that it would be as well. But basically what he's saying in this article that he wrote in 2016 was they're pushing these agendas way too hard, way too fast. They're going to provoke a backlash. They need to pump the brakes. They need to slow it down. And if they slow it down, they can pull it off. Because if they do the boil the frog thing slow enough for long enough, they can get where they want to go without provoking this backlash. But if they don't slow it down, they're going to provoke it. And so somebody like Haidt he's advocating a more moderate and reasonable approach for essentially callous motivations. Like he still wants the same things as all the other elitards, but he's like, look, you're not going to get it the way you're going.
He's trying to be more rational about it. Yeah.
Yeah. He's like, you need to slow down or, they're just going to upset the peasants are going to rise up. They're going to upset the whole apple cart. Yeah. And you could argue that's kind of what happened in 2016 with Trump and is going to keep happening in various ways until we finally get somebody who can finish the job.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe, hopefully. The peasants to me seem just more brainwashed and like just black-pilled than ever. And they'll just I feel like they're more liable to go along with anything. Even since Trump, it's like, how long has it been? We're closing on, when was he elected? 2017? So
that's when he took office. Yeah.
When he took office. Yeah. So not too long from now, it'll be like 10 years since him. A decade.
No, I'm saying this failure mode is essentially, it's in the hands of the left, whether they trigger this or provoke this or not. Like if they go slow enough, they won't provoke it. They'll be able to keep doing what they're doing. But if they go too fast and too hard, they might provoke it.
Maybe. So this is I do this the libertarian. When you say you came from a libertarian background, like most of you guys that are involved with Kurt seem to be from that background. And again, that's why you have your view is very much based on examining incentives and things, and like the how can I say it? You always factor in the materialist and the economical, but you do it in an extremely rational and correct way without any emotion, and that's great. And I can see how you do come from that point of things. Like when I think of someone, like when you're talking about that Haidt guy, I immediately think of classical values. I reach right back to like Rome and Greece and that, and I just think of a time before there was any of this the particularism of the left-right as we understand it now, and all-encompassing as it is. And there was a view to life that was entirely different and much more natural and free, where the values seemed much more correct, which I believe you are in tune with very much. And a lot of you guys are, the other guys as well, but you probably even more so. But like that, those are the real classical virtues and values that have any meaning. And like, regardless of all the whole left-right paradigm as we understand it and have to live through and fight from one side or the other is kind of a charade and a facade.
It's something kind of new in a lot of ways, but it's not that new in every way. I mean, stuff like this has happened before.
Well, like the Republic versus the Empire kind of thing in Rome, I guess.
Well, no. So the example I would go back to, are you familiar with the Albigensian Crusades?
Sort of, but
Okay,
not.
so there was this sect in the Middle Ages, I believe it was in the 12th century, called the Albigensians or the Cathars. They just called themselves the Bonhomme, the good men.
Mm-hmm.
But they were called Albigensians or Cathars. It was a Christian heresy. And so one of the things they believed was that because the world was fallen and sinful, it was sinful to bring a life into the world. So they were antinatalists. And the specific means of achieving antinatalism that they advocated was sodomy, which heterosexual sodomy, I believe, but still.
Nice.
And, they were pacifist.
Right.
And they extended that pacifist to animals, so they were vegetarian as well.
Okay.
They were
just your average hippie, really.
They were somewhat gender egalitarian, not by our standards, but certainly by the standards of the 12th.
That's the worst crime. That's the worst crime I've heard so far. That and antinatalism, actually.
Yeah. So they actually admitted women into their clergy.
Oh God,
they weren't able to attain the highest positions, but they were able.
Although you should have priestesses. I do believe in vestal version. That's a whole different. Go on.
So anyway, in a lot of ways, they were very similar to what we would consider to be hippies or leftists, right?
Right. But they were a bit more murderous. They would actually fight and things.
No, they were pacifist.
The Cathars, were they?
They were Cathars, but they were gaining huge ground through conversion.
Didn't they have like sieges and things
all across France? Well, yes. We'll get to that. The Catholic Church sent emissaries to them to try to, minister to them and reason with them and bring them back into the fold, right? But they rebuffed all of these overtures, saying that the Catholic Church was worldly and corrupt and all these things. Probably mostly true, but definitely not very wise to say to their faces. And finally, the Pope got fed up with all this. And he told the nobles in France, like, you have to deal with this, because it was really catching on in France. France was where it was biggest.
Right.
And it had already gotten to the point in many areas where they were like 20 and 30% of the population. And so the French nobles were like, well, these are our people. What can we do? And so the Pope went to the king and was like, you got to deal with this. And I'm declaring a crusade. So the king raised an army, and the first town they came to, Béziers, the papal legate, told them, all the good Catholics come out so you can be spared. And nobody came out. So he told the army, kill them all, God will know his own. So they did. They razed the whole city. They killed 20 or 30,000 people. Mm-hmm. And then they went around sacking other towns. And then the Inquisition spent a few decades mopping up the stragglers. So This is how outbreaks of leftism have been dealt with in the past. So it's not a new phenomenon. What's new is how far we've let it go.
So, but that's not a classical example. That is still a post-Christian example. But yes, I know what you mean. But we are in that framework of a post-Christian world, whether we like it or not. It's very hard to wholly step back into purely classical values. Though I would like to, and I believe you would as well, as a fan of pagan space imperialism. That the idea would be to return to entirely classical values that predate anything resembling any kind of universalism. To grasp their view entirely, like it's a thing that requires great study on its own to fully try to get their view back and to live in it. It's hard because in a way, it's extremely libertarian in that it seems like anything a man can do as an individual depends entirely on his level of strength, which is precisely tied up with how much you should admire him or how sort of godlike he is personally. And anything he might be able to do is sort of excused as the breadth of his strength. This is a factor in their view of the world that's kind of hard to understand in some ways, but there's a great freedom there in their way of thinking. There's danger, and there's like seems to be more. There's more brutality in a lot of ways, but that's only kind of like realistic, to me, sort of realistic, natural value stuff. Where we today hide away from death and brutality that we still commit it in a more egregious way, in a kind of fake, pretending it's not happening kind of way. Where everything back then was more honest, is what I.
Did you see the recent movie, The Northman?
Yes, I did.
I really enjoyed that one. And I thought it did a pretty good job. Not perfect, but I thought it did a pretty good job of, not only being historically accurate, but also kind of shedding those modern sensibilities.
Yeah.
And immersing you in a world with those kind of pre-modern sensibilities. Yeah. And I think a lot of people completely missed the point, and they took the wrong message from it. They were like, oh, it's dark and gritty and nobody's a hero. They're all villainous, brutal men. It's like, no, there's a moral logic to it. It's just not your moral logic. Right?
Yeah. Your fake one. But it's fake. Whenever someone's trying to do that, to be that sort of mealy-mouthed, I just care for everybody, it's fake. It's not real. It's not realistic. It doesn't help anybody. It generally makes things worse to be totally, try to be outside and pretend you don't have your own incentives, or that your tribe has its own incentives. And, the way out of like truly grim, endless combat is, you do want peace as well at times. You can't just be totally at war with the world constantly, but you, how can I say, there's a balance there. There's a balance there, as there is a balance. Balance is a great pagan virtue that Aristotle talked about a lot, and Plato. Harmony and balance was very important to them. So between any extremes and any possibility in nature, the best route is always in between, finding, which is this argument for centrism nowadays, you would think, but I would say that things are so far culturally left that no, and we're so far from these values in a dream world, an illusory world of darkness, that the balance between natural values and where we are is somewhere like off in the darkness that nobody can even hardly conceive. Even you and I would find it perhaps a bit dark.
I was conversely, I was somewhat disappointed recently. I tried to watch the Halo anime, and the first 20 minutes of it was just Cortana monologuing about how like bloodthirsty and violent humans are, in like a disapproving way, right? And I'm like, oh, rolling my eyes through the whole thing, right? And it's like, come on, like how can you make a military science fiction if you don't understand, let's say, the evolutionary or economic basis of conflict?
Right.
And you're just going to poo-poo it with some like, 20-something white girl sensibility about violence.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think, obviously you need peace, and you need peaceful virtues as well as martial ones, right? So balance, I'm totally on board with that. But I think it makes a difference whether you think of, I think of it from the standpoint that peace is fleeting, but war is eternal.
Maybe.
So, and the modern sensibility seems to be the opposite, which is that peace is the normal condition, and war is like at best, like a necessary but tragic interruption of the business of peace.
Yeah.
But I see it the other way around. War, conflict, struggle, those are the eternals. And then peace is a temporary interruption.
See, I when I was young and I was in art school, I experimented a lot with Ellis caused me to have weird introspection that was, but I remember obsessing around that time over just the concept of the fact of I realized then how important it was opinion, different opinion, and the length and breadth of a varying opinion to go in trying to establish itself and to win the war with other opinions. And it occurred to me, like, how can you be sure to trust everything you read in a book or see from the news, etc.? I remember having these thoughts at the time when I know there's conflicting opinions and people are going to fight to the death and lie about them and everything. and how important it was, and what a crucial thing in life, or what a big thing that I didn't hear talked about that often, was the fact of varying opinions in conflict, which is absolutely unavoidable fact of life. And the best you can do is find the best of two opinions that may or may not at different times fall into falsity. But generally the more true opinion is the one that's more difficult. So this is another hard fact of life. But all this rambling, we're not talking that much about the Musk and the Twitter, which we were meant to. I shouldn't go on too much about this nonsense. I'm talking about stupid shit now.
Well, one thing he tweeted recently was that he defines success, and he said this before, but he retweeted it yesterday, I believe. He defines success with Twitter as the right and the left being equally upset about his policies.
Right. There's no doubt in my mind he's taken a bit of a step right. What do you think? And that when he says that, that's part of him, I just think, presenting himself as a centrist.
Well, overall, I think he has taken a step right in the sense that he's going after leftists more now than they were gone after formerly.
Yeah.
So that does shift the mean right. And especially if he makes good on, I'm still waiting on my appeal, which I submitted this week, but if he makes good on his promise to reinstate a bunch of old banned accounts, then that will shift things even more to the right. But basically his point was that he wants Twitter to be for the middle 80%.
Right.
And there's been a lot of shade thrown at him for that comment. I think justly so, because I think that is an appeal to consensus more than anything else.
Right.
So he's conflating truth with agreement. And whatever is true must be what the most people agree on. And that's really not the case in a lot of cases. In a lot of cases, there is true and there is false. And whatever is in between true and false, that's not where the truth lies. The truth is on some extreme. It's on the true extreme and not the false extreme. And it's not anywhere in the middle either. This idea that the truth must necessarily lie between the two extremes, that has a lot of value when it comes to virtues. Virtues tend to lie between the extremes of different vices. The old Aristotelian mean of courage being the mean between cowardice and foolhardiness. I think that concept has a lot of applicability to virtues and vices, but when it comes to truth, I don't think it has nearly as much applicability. The truth more often lies on the extremes than in the middle.
Wasn't that Savitri Devi? Wasn't that a theory of hers? It was she mathematically spelled it out that in fact not only is the truth lie in the extreme, but any theory or idea must reach by necessity its most extreme point. Sort of. I think that was something to do with that. Sorry, I interrupted.
I wouldn't state it as an absolute, but I do observe that it tends to be the case often enough that the truth lies on some extreme or another.
Yeah. And it is often a very extreme thing, yes. But in terms of Musk then, and what in his trying to speculate as to what he's doing, what he's thinking, what do you think?
But this idea of trying to be the middle of the road, for the middle 80, that sort of thing.
But he's got to present that. He's got to try and present that, regardless of what he's actually. That's why it's hard to determine what he really thinks. He might actually think that, or he might. I don't see that he would have any choice to do any different. If he was more, perhaps he thinks like us.
I think he can be justly criticized on that point.
Okay.
Maybe he thinks it, maybe he doesn't.
Actually, if he thought like us that he could be honest about it, you think that?
Well, I mean, that depends on how courageous he is.
But as a tactic, strategically, do you think that would be a good move?
In his position, probably.
I don't think so.
Being anything like us would lead to a great diminution in his wealth and status.
Yeah. Yeah. So we can't tell his mind in that regard.
I think ultimately, though, people like us do need to rise up and build institutions and build businesses and various other things to compete in those spaces, so that people can run platforms and be like us. But I think it probably has to be done organically from the bottom up. Like it has to come from within our own communities and build up from that.
You mean that we should have our own version of Twitter that's not Gab either?
Well, I don't have any problem with Gab. Well, I mean, it is
Gab very Christian. Gab is very Christian and very, which is fine, but like almost too much so in some ways. I find kind of, I don't know.
I haven't seen him going after non-Christians in a big way.
No, it's just like I don't, when I interact with people there, it's more, it's just a lot of sort of Jesus stuff, which is fine, but it's not really what I'd normally.
The internet, it's almost like the internet started out as a great big, like, open world kind of no boundaries, no barriers. And it's kind of fragmenting back into a bunch of little fiefdoms, a bunch of little walled gardens.
Yeah. I guess so.
And that might be a good thing in a lot of ways, because there was a lot of contact between groups and people of diverse viewpoints and backgrounds and everything in the early days of the internet. And I think one of the main things I learned from that is I just don't want to have anything to do with certain kinds of people. And
we're terrible.
And I don't think it's totally bad that it's evolving back into like a series of walled gardens or cloistered. We need our own.
Yeah.
We need our own so that we can communicate and do the things that we need to do. But as far as if the leftists have their own platform and we have our own platform, and maybe the centrist classical liberals can have Twitter now, that's fine with me ultimately, as long as we're not completely shut out. So
I hope you do get your Twitter back, because I do. When you have the platform, which is at least ostensibly or somewhat free speech the way it is, you will find it is reminding me of how it was before, and it is pretty good because you can still interact with these other groups on other sides without just being immediately punished and banned and whatever, shadow banned. You can do it now. You can have these interactions, and which generally you probably come out on top of, and someone like you especially would really thrive there and become probably quite popular very fast, as you did before.
One thing that the internet has taught me is that it's not necessarily a good thing that my mother tongue, and really the only language that I'm fluent in, is the lingua franca of the world, because there are a lot of people around the world. I don't want to hear what they have to say. I don't want to be able to understand what they have to say. And I don't really like that they can understand me. So I kind of almost wish that my mother tongue and my main language was something a little bit more obscure, so that I was a little bit more disconnected from the world than I am.
But you've had a good influence, and I thought you were very good, and it's good to have somebody who can be influential. You definitely had an impact. I'm sure it changed a lot of people's minds. I remember your old videos. You'd be sitting there, like, screaming to yourself in your truck, like, "We're gonna take this shit back," all this kind of thing. And I it was good. I'm sure, it's good to influence those people that are able to be influenced, and to help them out in a way, I guess. I mean, sometimes you feel bad because you sort of red pill someone, and in a way you destroy them in some ways, but in other ways you save them. It's a weird double, two-sided coin thing. But what were you kicked off Twitter for? What was the specific?
I have no idea what the specific thing was. When I appealed, the reason they declined my appeal was they said my Twitter was devoted predominantly to inciting violence against other groups, which I think is probably about as spurious as
predominantly devoted to.
Well, first of all, that's only one of many things I did with my Twitter, but
all right.
Second of all, even to the extent that I did that, it was in a very indirect and implicit way. Just like with the Jordan Peterson thing or the Kanye thing, they're not explicitly calling for violence in any way, shape, or form, right? That's an excuse or a justification that's being used to kick them off the platform based on a very flimsy pretext. And I'm sure the exact application of that to my tweets was probably similarly flimsy.
It's funny those two examples too, because I know from what I can see of Jordan Peterson's tweeting, he would be very much opposed to Kanye coming back.
Oh yeah, he wants Kanye off the platform.
He's become, before he wasn't like that before, as I recall. He's become very kind of what's the word?
Well, he works directly and openly for a certain tribe now, in a way that he didn't before.
Does he work for Ben Shapiro or something, or what?
Yeah.
Does he work for?
Yeah.
Oh, he does. He's in that little cabal. Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, so that's fine. Yeah, because he's being like, too sort of righteous.
And I've heard other allegations before about how his ties to that particular set. I don't know how many of them are true or whatever, but he definitely has that's definitely been a big blind spot of his, at least over the years, where he's refused to address that issue. And actually, no, he hasn't refused to address it.
He was giving a speech once, and someone asked him out of the crowd about Solzhenitsyn. Do you remember that?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I made a video about that.
I can't answer it. He was like, he backed away.
I made a video about that. And what I said in that video was, I wouldn't really give him a hard time if he refused to address it, but he didn't refuse to address it. He actually took it up later, and he just addressed it in a very bad and inadequate and misleading way.
I didn't hear that.
Where he attributed it all the disproportionate, let's say, influence and wealth and power that this particular group has. He attributed it entirely to their supposedly higher IQ. And even if you think the claims of their higher IQ are accurate, the disproportionality of their influence and power and wealth is much greater than their supposedly higher IQ. And not only that, but even if it was based entirely on their IQ, that wouldn't mean it was a good thing or something we should tolerate.
Well, I don't see it in like, I tend to think, how can I put it? Definitely there's a bunch of them that are very up to no good and being a bad influence. I tend to be like,
high IQ in that case is a bad thing. It's not a good thing. You don't want,
no, I know. But he doesn't want whoever's
defrauding you to be smarter.
He doesn't have to be so lick-ass about it. He's so kind of, but that's his character inside is he's always weeping. He's got a certain weakness, kind of, I don't know.
Yeah. I'm not going to speculate about his deeper motivations, but he definitely is a boomer.
You just have to be honest in that. If you don't want to be totally sort of, what's the word, not prejudicial or sweepingly condemn any whole group of any kind, you can still be honest about at least certain numbers of them. Certain powerful ones do seem to have a bit of a neurotic dislike for Western civilization or something, or I'd love to. This is something we shouldn't even dream of talk about on YouTube. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. So yeah, right. There's that. But I did want to say, what are do you have predictions as to what will happen with Musk in this Twitter business? Would you? I think I asked you already, but maybe you don't. But
well, my predictions about Twitter and Musk are not incredibly specific. I do think Musk is part of a small but growing pivot among elitards towards this like center classical liberal kind of sensibility. Right. I think he is leading a pivot back in that direction. It's still small, it's still nascent, but I think it's going to grow and it's going to become more influential over time. Because I am an incrementalist and not an accelerationist, I think that is a positive development, even though it is inadequate in terms of what I would like to see, in terms of where I would like us to ultimately go. I don't think it's really the solution to any of the fundamental problems, but I do think it's less bad in a lot of ways than what we have now, which is just rabid leftism and clown world bullshit and all this kind of stuff. from that standpoint, I welcome it. I'm going to try not to stand in its way. I'm going to try not to counter signal it. I think Musk is part of that. He's the biggest part currently, but there are other parts, like this Jonathan Haidt that I mentioned, and there's still others kind of going in this direction. And in addition to the classical liberal, centrist kind of thing, there's also like there is like a conservative Christian evangelical elite. There are other billionaires who are like conservative evangelical Christians who have 10 kids or more. There's like at least 10 billionaires with more kids than Elon Musk. He has 9, and all of them are, as far as I know, Trump supporting evangelical Christian types. So there is this like conservative evangelical Christian elite as well that is growing demographically. So Ed Dutton makes this point that the leftist elitards actually are not reproducing at replacement level. So they're not even replenishing their own ranks. So they are going to die out. They're going to be supplanted. They're going to be subsumed by more classically liberal, centrist, and conservative elites over time.
That's like a generation away. I mean, that's a long time.
It is. It's decades away. Maybe by the end of the century or something. But so there is a pivot back in that direction. Now, those of us who would like to go even a lot farther than centrism or classical liberalism or conservatism, we still have our work cut out for us in terms of growing our thing and increasing our numbers and everything, our power and resources and all of that. So we still have our work cut out for us because that stuff is not our stuff necessarily. But I do think it's easier to work in that environment, right, and make headway than it is in the current environment. So from that standpoint, I consider it an improvement. And, I'm going to try not to stand in the way of it or counter signal it too much.
Okay, and what do you think about the corruption of the system, though? Like, I'm actually already surprised that he hasn't been visited by the FBI or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, what are his chances of withstanding that kind of thing?
Well, I mean, I guess that's where you get into like conspiracy theorizing, right? Because it's like, what are the odds? What are the odds that he hasn't already?
The Biden admin is being directly attacked here, and the type of people to not. They will lash out. I'm sure they will.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Well, that's certainly something that could happen. Yeah, but I'm honestly surprised that he hasn't gotten more heat than he has. That he hasn't gotten more pushback than he has. That he hasn't gotten more flack than he has. Even though he's gotten some, it's obviously been pretty late as far as
I thought I actually my theory was that it's to do with Starlink and they need the Starlink for their war in Ukraine kind of thing. Maybe. What do you think about that?
That might have something to do with it. Yeah. Starlink might be like part of, one thing it does is it gives the US essentially immunity to anti-satellite weaponry. So the U.S. has been dependent on GPS, on communication satellites in geostationary orbit. But those are few in number. There's only like 24 GPS satellites. There's only like 24. I don't know how many there are in geostationary orbit, but it's a small number, right? So those would be relatively easy to target with anti-satellite weaponry. Something like Starlink, where you have thousands and thousands of satellites, it's not currently feasible for Russia or China to knock all of those satellites out, or even a large fraction of them.
Right.
So something like that would be more robust to possible countermeasures than what the military had been relying on. So from that standpoint, yes, what Musk is doing does substantially beef up their capabilities and also their ability to withstand counterattacks.
So that is his ace in the hole, perhaps, in that regard. It could be. I mean, I don't know, depends on what's more important to them.
Right.
I guess. I don't know. But that was my theory as to why they didn't, or immediately either shoot him or.
Well, I mean, you could always go down the conspiracy theory rabbit hole and be like, he's not just his own man. He's doing something on behalf of shadowy figures working behind the scenes or whatever. Who knows? Maybe he is, maybe he isn't.
Shadowy figures.
But
from what I can see, he's his own man, and from everything I saw, but I would be very surprised to hear that or think that. But yeah, you're right. A lot of the conspiracy types.
But I do think, whether there's any basis to those theories or not, I do think he is the herald of something that is happening, and it's larger than him. Although at this point, it's not much larger than him. He's definitely the biggest part. But there is this pivot. There is this shift away from the old elitard consensus, which was all, totally leftist, globalist, misanthropic in a lot of ways. Like just talking about overpopulation, for example. Elitard consensus for decades, 50 years, 75 years, has been that the world is overpopulated and it's getting more overpopulated, and humans are bad and they're a virus and they're parasitic inherently. That's been elitard consensus for generations. And then along comes Elon Musk and he's like, no, that's fucking bullshit and it's stupid and it's vile and people need to be having more babies, right?
Yeah, he's always said that one too. That's another one he's always said. That's like a quirky notion that is surprising.
Where was I going with that? I don't even know where I was going with that. But my point is, he is materially better in a lot of ways. And I think he's not the only one. He's the first of probably many that will be shifting things in different directions. Now, is it where things ultimately need to go? Is it enough? I don't think so. I think a lot of these things are inadequate. Just going back to classical liberalism and free speech and stuff, from our standpoint, is obviously inadequate, because that's what led to what we have now. And if that's bad, then what led to it is bad. The vulnerabilities in classical liberalism are what opened us up to this leftist clown world. So those need to be addressed. Those need to be fixed. And I don't think somebody like Musk, at least not yet, doesn't do that adequately. So
I do see, like, you're not on Twitter yet, and hopefully you do get back on. But from what I've seen, especially in the last couple of days, is that just having the little bit of freedom he's allowed has definitely already made a shift. And I see people that I thought were more just genuine centrists making some fairly, I believe, comments that they've been holding on to close to their heart that are more in line with something we might think. A lot of them, even prominent ones, where I'm like shocked, like, oh, really? Okay.
Well, it's been crazy seeing the Overton window shift these last few years.
Well, no, this is just like what shifted the other way for years, but I'm just talking about the last week, just feeling a shift in the other way, at least just on Twitter. But I mean, it's how much that means or how significant it is outside of Twitter, I don't know. But
there have been other people moving the Overton window our way, like Tucker Carlson, and
that's true. Yeah, he's been good too.
Who else? I've been pleasantly surprised by how fast the Overton window among like normie conservatives is shifting our way.
Well, they say like decades go and hardly anything changes, and then like a week goes by and everything changes or whatever. That can happen as well, yeah. But what was I going to say? Here, some people did make some comments. I will read a couple, maybe. I'd like to see Elon harvest asteroids for the rare material. Yes, I think everybody here would like that. And once again, I mean, I get a lot of pushback from people also who aren't into space. They say it's cringe to be into space. Once again, I do not understand this attitude at all. Like, I don't know why would you be against that? Like, as if to be upset that people went to the moon or that they might go to Mars or beyond, to actually for that to make you angry is so strange and cheap. I don't even know what you're thinking. Eli, can you explain to me what their mindset is? Because I don't know.
I don't fully understand it either. I just think it probably goes over their heads, and they probably just don't understand it. And
they think the world is encapsulated in the flat Earth that they're living on. Everything beyond is like a.
And there's probably some extent to which they know they're not going to benefit from it directly. They might benefit from it indirectly, but like these are not the type of people who would be tapped for like any kind of astronaut program.
Yeah,
So
well, I guess, but there's a lot of them. I mean, most, I don't know how many more, like some people, some of them are very smart. Like I remember hearing this kind of comment from people that I thought were very smart as well. So it's kind of a weird attitude. Someone else says, gentlemen, I believe we're at the point we can say we are the last mortal generation. I don't know about that. He's talking about the transhumanism making us.
I think if immortality were adaptive, it already would have evolved. Like,
yeah.
There's no reason why we necessarily have to senesce and die.
Well, I do think myself. I think everything in nature is sort of cyclical. It has a period of nothing can go beyond it. Like everything just kind of morphs and changes. I don't believe there is kind of eternal death either. But
so if there were some benefit to our genes of us individually living a lot longer, we probably would live a lot longer. Like, I think it's probably the case that it's more beneficial for our genes for us to expire as individuals in less than a century. Right. And, clear the stage for other instances of our genes embodied in other individuals to take over and do their own thing, for whatever reason. Maybe just because, that natural turnover keeps new variations of our genes popping up. And so that you always have different variations that can respond to changing circumstances, right? Yeah. And move in one direction or another direction. That's probably the explanation. So circumstances are always going to change. As long as circumstances change, a fixed group of individuals is not going to be able to adapt to them. So you want populations of individuals with varying qualities so that the subset of the population that's most adapted to those circumstances can take over and exploit those opportunities, right? So it's probably something to do with that. If immortality were adaptive, immortality or something much closer to immortality probably already would have evolved. So I don't think, even if you can come up with medical technology that can radically extend life or whatever, I don't think those older individuals are going to prove able to compete with.
But even the Earth isn't going to live forever, and maybe you could be immortal by moving out into space or whatever. But I mean, theoretically, the Earth and the Sun itself will die, and everything in the cosmos seems to have a lifespan, and at least whether it completely vanishes or undergoes a fundamental change is better way of putting it, I think. But
I just think the transhumanism thing is going to ultimately prove to be a bunch of empty promises.
Oh, I think so too.
Yeah. So a lot of it will never pan out, will never come to fruition.
That's what I was going to say before too. Yeah. Finish. Sorry. I won't.
And that which is created at some point will ultimately prove to be not as great of an idea as it sounds at first.
There's also the fact that you're talking about earlier on. You're talking about self-driving cars and things. I never thought that was a good idea. That was any way practical. I always just think there's no way that any kind of AI car can react as well as a driver could in case of an accident or emergency, this and that. Or it reminds me of the quandary of the robot, the idea of the Asimov-style human robot that they still try to do. But it's like, okay, you're spending millions on this metal man that can almost do what a man can already do, where, you can make a man just by having sex with a woman.
Well,
it's like this impractical.
I don't have too much trouble believing that they can get self-driving cars to the point someday. Maybe it's not there yet.
Then why not take a train then or something?
Someday they can get it to the point where they're safer on average than any human driver, right? Not in every circumstance, but on average they'll be safer than a human driver. They'll get to that point and they'll continue to make incremental improvements until it's much safer than a human driver. But here's the problem. We live in a post-trust society where we don't have a high trust society. We don't think that institutions and elites have our best interests at heart. We don't trust them. We think they're nefarious with good reason because they're constantly demonstrating, their malevolence and their general lack of trustworthiness. Right. So why would you put your life into their hands in that way?
Right.
Or even something that can be exploited by a third party, like let's say a government intelligence agency.
Yeah.
Right.
So I mean, practical things that come into this.
It's not just an issue of okay, can they get the technology to the point where it actually works better than a human? There's all this other stuff around it that also materially impacts the whole equation.
Yeah. Okay. Another question is: I always assumed accelerationism meant towards the collapse of the state, which is the only real thing preventing us righting ourselves. Well, yeah. I mean, that's, I guess, what it means. So,
I don't think that the state can be redeemed or salvaged or rehabilitated or repaired or in any way. Not this state. I'm not an I'm no longer a libertarian, so I'm not an anti-statist in principle. Right. I don't have an idea. I don't have a problem with the idea of a state or a territorial monopolist on violence or whatever, however you want to define it. But this particular state, I think, has squandered all of its legitimacy, and to the point where I think it's irreparable. Like it can't be reclaimed. So I do support the collapse of this state and many other extant states. But my incremental strategy or approach that I would recommend for achieving that is to build the institutions within it, inside of it, underneath it, whatever. Yeah. Build the alternative institutions up so that they can ultimately take over. If you just get rid of it, well, first of all, if you wait for it to collapse, that may never come. Like with North Korea, it could just get worse and worse to like extents you can't even imagine, right? We don't know how low it can go. So
North Korea, best Korea.
Let's not try to find out there. But just like hoping it'll get worse until it collapses, I think is a desperate gamble that's probably not worthwhile, because it can probably get worse than we think it can. Right. So I think we should start building the institutions of a new state within the old state or underneath the old state, independent from the old state, but within the framework of the old state.
In the catacombs. Underneath.
Yeah. So we got to have something to take over when this state collapses or whatever. But I favor an incremental approach there, building what we want within what already exists.
Right. Okay. Someone else says, I miss white Sharia Eli. I remember that too. Yeah. That was funny.
I have never disavowed white Sharia.
Yeah. I mean, why would you? Why would you? Children's books are even saying as a fact that the Earth can only sustain 10 billion people. Yeah, the population thing. Yeah, that's what they're. That kind of view is in charge of the world. What does Eli think about the conspiracy theory that we didn't go to the moon? Is this not pretty probable considering the Cold War incentives to fake it and the lack of video evidence?
I don't consider it to be the most probable scenario, because I think at that point in time, it probably would have been better to actually do it than to fake it convincingly. Like, obviously you could fake it convincingly now with CGI and everything else. But those techniques didn't exist at the time. Yeah. If you look at science fiction movies from the 1960s, they weren't nearly as convincing or as polished as, the NASA footage. Yeah. So the technology didn't exist to fake it at the time. It would have been easier just to do it back then. And as far as the incentives to fake it with the Cold War and everything, that also gives Russia incentives to call foul. And they would have been in a position to know, they had intelligence assets in every government institution in the West. They would have known if we had faked it. They would have called foul, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah, and I agree. The reason it's obviously, like, I don't know. I trust my intuition. It's the same thing with Musk, where there's conspiracy theories about him, but I feel instinctually that he is exactly as he seems, more or less. Maybe he's hiding certain things, but the same thing with the moon landing footage and everything else. I always just thought, well, it's too, as with Musk, it has too many overt flaws, very human flaw. Like, the footage is shabby and they're like stumbling around, and it's not the way when people try to fake things. It's it's almost impossible to make. The idea of realism when you see something comes from the flaws in it, really. not the flaws in like fake looking, like the flaws of, like I said, where the footage was a bit shabby and the ship itself was kind of like a ragtag looking thing. If they were going to fake the whole thing, it would have been like a glorious streamlined silver rocket, and it would have looked more alien and not just like the dust ball of shite that the moon actually is. It just seemed too real. I've never seen any reason to doubt it to begin with. And plus, you hear the theories. Someone said to me recently, not that long ago, like, how do you explain the fact that what it was something ridiculous, like that the number on the bicycle of Neil Armstrong was the same as the phone number of Stanley Kubrick or something like that. Like something ludicrous like this, So I just, people can go into these spirals. This is, conspiracy spirals over things. And sometimes there's some truth to them, and sometimes they are just spiraling. Like the flat earth guys or, other people. I just think there's many that are just a bad premise, and that you can find and search continually for details that back up your premise, but you're trapped in a kind of illusory world.
Well, again, I'm going to get back to the problem of induction on that. And, all the supporting evidence you gather for your crackpot theory doesn't make it more true. Even if you find things that are consistent with your crackpot theory, it doesn't matter how many you find 100 facts that are consistent with your crackpot theory, 1,000 facts, 1,000,000, 1 or 2 or 3 facts that are inconsistent with it totally overturns the whole thing.
Yeah.
So that's the only way we can approach the truth, is by disconfirming, by falsifying theories. And as far as I'm concerned, nobody has ever falsified the mainstream moon landing narrative that NASA actually did it. I can't falsify it. I've actually checked the math and it all works out. So, if you look at the published masses of the rocket and the stages and everything in the spacecraft and the performance of the vehicles and, the volume of the tanks and the density of the liquids and everything, it's all congruent. Like it all fits, right? It could have, if all of that information is correct and it's not out of line with what exists for other rockets today, then, it would have been really, I'm not saying it's impossible to fake it, but it would have been really hard to get all of that information to match and fit together in such a way that the math actually works out to like, oh yeah, this rocket could actually carry that much payload to the moon and back.
Yeah. Which is actually making me think now that when Musk, hopefully, if he does get his Mars mission going, and people are on the way, or they get there, there's going to be a whole bunch of people that believe it's not happening, never happened, that it's all set up in some studio somewhere as it's happening, which is pretty funny. But yeah, I mean, what can you do about that? But yeah, I think I've kept you long enough, Eli. That's been like 2 hours, so I think we've covered it pretty well as to the events of what's been going on, and your prediction as to how it may go, and my ideas about what may happen, which basically don't know. But I do think it's a good thing that's happening overall. I think you do as well, and we'll see what happens. It does feel like with this, say in the last week or two, many events, it almost had that vibe of kind of 2015 or whatever, where a rapid succession of amazing events, which sort of take the left and everybody off guard. It's like, whoa, and you're barely reeling from the last one when something else happens. And
well, here's my prediction.
Sign of that's going to continue, because I believe that's a good, healthy sign of cultural change and expansion. Sorry, go on.
Here's my prediction of where things are going to continue to go over the coming decades and into the remainder of this century, which is that things are going to continue to get, generally speaking, more dysfunctional, more dysgenic. Big things are going to break down, meaning the US, the European Union, Brazil, China, Russia, right? But there's still going to be islands of functionality, islands of sanity, and maybe even more of it than we've experienced. Because right now we're dealing with kind of like monolithic insanity, monolithic dysfunctionality. And I think the future is going to be, when those monoliths start to break down, yes, there's going to be maybe more insanity and more dysfunction overall, but there will be islands of sanity. There will be islands of functionality, and people like Musk, probably will have a hand in creating some of those. So that's my prediction for where the future is going overall.
Yeah, and I would agree. I think someone like Musk is best that he's doing what he's doing, and he's the type of person who can do it. And in terms of all of us and what we should all be doing, we should similarly be kind of thinking, adapt our thinking to be in line with the freebooter and the lone sort of pirate or something, and don't be worried about the morality of the system itself, and just think to your own survival in a classical value kind of way.
Western men have a long and glorious history of piracy.
That's right. We do indeed. And the time has come again, Eli. The time has come again. So that's it. I'm going to say goodbye. Eli, thank you for coming on again.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, once again. And we'll do it again sometime soon, hopefully. And goodbye.
All right. Talk to you later.